When things fell apart with my family, I found myself in need of a new place to stay. After scouring various roommate and apartment apps, I stumbled upon an intriguing listing on one of them. A man named Michael had posted a room for rent in his cozy 2-bedroom apartment. The rent was surprisingly affordable for the area, at $800 a month. Michael mentioned that he spent most of his time at work, so the renter would often have the place to themselves. I arranged to meet Michael and view the apartment. When he opened the door, I could sense a hint of nervousness in his demeanor. Nevertheless, he showed me around the apartment, explaining the house rules along the way. Everything seemed standard until he mentioned that the attic and the storage room were off limits to tenants. I shrugged it off and agreed to move in. The first few days went smoothly as I settled into my new room, but soon I started noticing peculiarities. Strange sounds would echo through the apartment at night, and I often caught glimpses of Michael hurrying around when he was supposed to be at work. One night, I ventured downstairs to investigate the noises and found the basement door unlocked. As I peered down the stairs, I heard muffled banging sounds coming from below. I cautiously made my way down the creaky steps, my heart pounding in my chest. The basement was dimly lit, and the air carried a musty odor. I could see Michael in the far corner, hunched over something. As I approached, he looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and annoyance. "What are you doing down here?" he demanded, his voice sharp in the quiet space. I stammered out an apology, explaining that I was just investigating the noises. Michael's gaze softened slightly, but he insisted that the basement was off limits to tenants and ushered me back upstairs, firmly shutting the door behind us. Back in my room, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. What was Michael hiding in that basement? And why was he so secretive about it? Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My belongings seemed slightly out of place, as if someone had been rifling through them while I was out. And then, one night, I woke to find Michael standing at the foot of my bed, watching me in the darkness. My heart leaped into my throat as I stared wide-eyed at Michael's shadowy figure. He stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity, before finally speaking in a low voice. "I hope I didn't startle you," he murmured, his tone oddly calm given the situation. I struggled to find my voice, my mind racing with fear and confusion. "What are you doing in my room?" I managed to croak out. Michael took a step closer, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay," he replied softly. "You seemed restless, so I thought I'd check on you." His words did little to ease my nerves. If anything, they only heightened my sense of dread. What was he really doing in my room in the dead of night? "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a weak smile. "You really shouldn't be in here without my permission." Michael's expression darkened slightly, but he nodded in understanding. "I apologize," he said, taking a step back. "I'll leave you to rest." With that, he turned and left the room, his footsteps fading into the silence of the apartment. I lay there in the darkness, my mind racing with questions and suspicions. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of paranoia that had settled over me. I knew I had to confront Michael about his behavior, but I also knew it wouldn't be easy. As the days passed, tension hung heavy in the air between Michael and me. I tried to go about my daily routine as normally as possible, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Michael was always watching, always lurking just out of sight. One evening, as I was preparing dinner in the kitchen, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. I tensed, expecting to see Michael standing there, but when I turned around, the hallway was empty. I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me and continued with my meal. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, felt like a looming presence in the darkness. Unable to sleep, I decided to confront Michael once and for all. I marched to his room and knocked firmly on the door, steeling myself for whatever confrontation lay ahead. To my surprise, Michael answered almost immediately, his expression guarded but not hostile. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice tinged with weariness. I took a deep breath, summoning all of my courage. "We need to talk," I said firmly. "About what's been happening lately." Michael's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded, stepping aside to let me into his room. I hesitated for a moment before crossing the threshold, unsure of what I might find on the other side. Inside, the room was neat and orderly, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing in my mind. Michael gestured for me to take a seat, and I did so reluctantly, my nerves on edge. "I know things have been tense between us," I began, choosing my words carefully, "and I think it's time we address the elephant in the room." Michael regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "And what would that be?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. The strange noises at night, the feeling of being watched. I can't shake the feeling that something's not right here, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment there was silence between us, thick and heavy with unspoken tension. And then, to my surprise, Michael sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping in resignation. "I suppose there's no point in denying it any longer," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "You deserve to know the truth." Michael's admission sent a shiver down my spine. I waited with bated breath as he gathered his thoughts, wondering what dark secrets he was about to reveal. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with sorrow. "I haven't been entirely honest with you," he confessed. "There are things about this apartment, things you don't know." I leaned in closer, my curiosity piqued despite my growing unease. "What things?" I pressed, my heart pounding in my chest. Michael hesitated, as if wrestling with his own demons. "This apartment, it's not what it seems," he began, his words slow and deliberate. "There's a presence here, a darkness that lingers in the shadows." I felt a chill run down my spine at his words, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. "What kind of presence?" I whispered, my voice barely audible above the sound of my own heartbeat. Michael's eyes darkened, his expression haunted by memories long forgotten. "It's hard to explain," he admitted, "but ever since I moved in here, strange things have been happening, things I can't explain." I listened in rapt attention as Michael recounted his experiences, each word sending a chill down my spine. He spoke of whispers in the night, of shadows that danced in the corners of his vision, of a darkness that seemed to seep into every crack and crevice of the apartment. As he spoke, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping over me. Was it possible that Michael was telling the truth? Or was he simply spinning a tale to cover up his own misdeeds? Before I could voice my doubts, Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished key. "There's something I need to show you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. With trembling hands, Michael handed me the key, its metal cool against my skin. I glanced at it uncertainly, my mind awash with conflicting emotions. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Michael's expression was grave as he met my gaze. "It's the key to the attic," he replied solemnly. "There are things up there, things you need to see for yourself." I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to run, to leave this place and never look back. But curiosity got the better of me, overriding my fear with a burning desire to uncover the truth. Taking a deep breath, I nodded slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. "Okay," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Let's go." Together we made our way to the attic, the air heavy with anticipation. Michael unlocked the door with a click, the sound echoing in the silence of the apartment. As the door swung open, a wave of musty air washed over us, carrying with it the scent of old wood and decay. I took a hesitant step forward, my eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering in through the dusty windows. What I saw next sent a chill down my spine. The attic was filled with strange artifacts, each one more unsettling than the last. There were old books bound in cracked leather, their pages yellowed with age. There were peculiar symbols scrawled on the walls, their meaning lost to time. But it was the altar at the center of the room that truly sent shivers down my spine. It was adorned with candles and strange trinkets, its surface stained with what looked like dried blood. As I gazed upon the scene before me, a sense of dread washed over me like a tidal wave. Whatever secrets this apartment held, they were darker and more sinister than I could have ever imagined. Under the dim light of the attic, Michael's voice broke the silence, his tone heavy with solemnity. "I never meant for you to get caught up in all of this," he said, his gaze fixed on the altar before us. "But now that you're here, there's something you need to know." I listened intently as Michael began to recount the history of the apartment, a history steeped in darkness and despair. He spoke of a previous tenant who had dabbled in the occult, of rituals performed in secret under the cover of night. As he spoke, I felt a chill run down my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. It was as if the very air around us had grown heavy with the weight of centuries-old secrets. "And what about you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you stay here if you knew all of this?" Michael's gaze met mine, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and resignation. "I didn't have a choice," he admitted. "The darkness, it has a way of drawing you in, of consuming you until there's nothing left." I shuddered at his words, a cold dread settling in the pit of my stomach. It was clear now that there was more to this apartment than met the eye, that its walls held secrets far darker than I could have ever imagined. As we stood there in the oppressive silence of the attic, I knew that I had to get out of this place, that I couldn't stay here a moment longer. But even as I turned to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was watching, waiting for its next victim. As we descended from the attic, a sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air. I could feel the darkness pressing in on us, its tendrils reaching out to ensnare us in its grasp. But just as we reached the bottom of the stairs, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence, echoing through the apartment with a bone-chilling intensity. My heart leaped into my throat as I spun around, searching desperately for the source of the sound. Michael's face had turned pale, his eyes wide with fear. "It's too late," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "They've found us." Before I could respond, the walls began to tremble, the floorboards groaning beneath our feet. Shadows writhed and twisted in the corners of the room, taking on grotesque shapes and forms. And then, with a deafening roar, the darkness descended upon us, swallowing us whole in its inky depths. I screamed, clawing desperately at the void, but there was no escape. In that moment of terror, I realized the horrifying truth. The apartment was not haunted by ghosts or spirits, but by something far more sinister, something ancient and malevolent beyond comprehension. And as the darkness consumed me, dragging me down into its depths, I knew that I would never escape its grasp. With a final bone-chilling scream, the darkness consumed everything, leaving only silence in its wake. The apartment stood empty, its secrets buried beneath layers of dust and decay. As for Michael and me, our fates were sealed within those cursed walls, condemned to wander the halls of the apartment for all eternity. And so, the legend of the haunted apartment lived on, whispered in hushed tones by those brave enough to speak its name. But for those who dared to venture inside, the truth remained hidden, lost to the darkness that lurked within. And as the years passed, the apartment faded into obscurity, a mere footnote in the annals of history. But for those who had experienced its horrors firsthand, the memories would haunt them forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. And so, dear reader, heed my warning. Beware the haunted apartment, for once you enter, there is no escape from its sinister embrace. And also, please remember, it wasn't just a puppy. So you better click that subscribe button